Welcome, friends, to Hold the Line. Look, gotta be honest, not good news today on the presidential election front. We already know this. You've had Joe Biden surge ahead in Pennsylvania and Georgia. Looks like he's going to maintain leads elsewhere. And if this current trend continues, he will not be going off quietly into the twilight of his presidential ambitions, as so many people had hoped. No, he might actually end up being the next president of the United States. Look, I know it's sad. It hurts me too. But come on, what are we, libs? We're not going to cry about it. And we're in a fight right now, and that fight is not over. Let's talk for a moment about process. What is an election? Why do we say it's something that matters so much to us? I mean, yeah, at the core, there are the principles of individual determination, autonomy. People should be governed with their consent. Of course, that's why we have democratic processes. But the only way to get the closest approximation of what the consent of the people may be is through a process. Now, there's no perfect means of doing this, and that process that we put into place has a lot of rules, regulations, laws, and these are things that should be adhered to by both sides. Otherwise, what do we really rest the end result on? We must have both sides agree to abide by the same rules. The same game has got to be played by both teams. That also includes going to the courts when there's a dispute. Now, I understand there's going to be a huge effort among liberals, among Democrats to convince everybody that Trump is trying to do something that's illicit here. But in fact, this is a repeated theme for the Trump administration. You see, when it comes to someone blocking a Trump administration initiative or when there's an issue of policy that can't be resolved through the regular processes of the legislative branch, Trump goes to court. That's what Trump has been doing as president for 4 years. Not exactly the way the tyrant they say he is would act, huh? Tyrants don't go to court. They don't respect the decisions of courts that go against them. Trump has done both of those things, but this is part of the process. And it's important that we don't allow the propaganda campaign of the Democrats to cloud that fact by convincing us that somehow seeking redress in our courts is going around the election or outside the election. Remember, Al Gore was being a big baby back in 2000. We all know it. He only wanted recounts in Democratic strongholds in Florida, not in other parts of the state. So he was cherry picking, and the court slapped it down, and as we all know, George Bush became president. But there was nothing illegal about Al Gore's choice of taking it to the courts. He wasn't destroying our sacred democracy. You didn't have people acting like the end of the country was nigh because Al Gore thought that he had the right to go to court. That's what's supposed to happen. He made that decision, and he lost. Trump is making a decision now to go to court. His campaign is taking this the legal route. And we'll see what the final dispensation of this will be, but there's absolutely nothing about this that anyone should be ashamed of or concerned about when it comes to our democracy. There's nothing here that's outside of what should be expected under these highly unusual circumstances. We have an election that's not just razor thin in one state, it's razor thin in a half a dozen states where changes in the count always seem to go in Joe Biden's favor. I'm certainly not the only one who's picked up on this. Whenever there's 5,000 new ballots found here or 10,000 new ballots unexpectedly that turn up there, they almost always entirely go for Joe Biden, or close to entirely. Some of that's just the fact that Democrats are much more likely to use mail-in voting than Republicans are. Oh, and this was always the plan, wasn't it? Democrats used COVID-19 panic as an excuse to change that process, that voting process, to their advantage. So if we're really going to talk about who's switching things up, if we're really going to talk about who's making sure the rules tilt in their favor, let's all understand the Democrats, in cases like Pennsylvania, took it upon themselves to just say, forget the legislature. This is what actually goes to the Constitution, my friends. State legislatures get to determine through their processes the rules for their own election in that state. Doesn't say that a state attorney general or the governor gets to ignore whatever the legislative rulemaking about elections may be within a given state. Whatever the law actually says is supposed to matter when it comes to elections. But in Pennsylvania, there was this emergency declaration because of COVID, so they went with universal mail-in ballots. That wasn't all, though. They got rid of signature matching. They got rid of postmark requirements. The new rules essentially turned the election into a free-for-all, and they used COVID as the excuse for that. Look, I voted in person in New York City. Tens of millions of people voted in person all over the country. Earlier this year, at the height of the pandemic, there was an election in Wisconsin. People voted in person. They were fine. There's no undue risk to all of this. If you can go to the store and get milk with your mask on, you can go vote. But it was an excuse that we knew Democrats had been preparing for months, and they used it with great effect this time around. But there's a real legal question here. In fact, the media is hoping you don't revisit the recent 4-4 judgment of the Supreme Court. You can go read it for yourself. The Supreme Court punted on the question of whether or not the Pennsylvania courts could unilaterally decide to change state election law, allowing mail-in ballots to be counted if they are received after Election Day. John Roberts and the 3 liberals on the court decided, well, you know what? We're just going to trust the Democrat-controlled government of Pennsylvania to do the right thing here. We don't want to get in the way of people voting right now, so we'll look at this after the election. Except now it's too late. Listen, we were warned about the dangers of mail-in balloting. Just months ago, Attorney General Bill Barr was sounding the alarm. You could tell this is one of the most brilliant legal minds in the country on issues like this, and he was warning us. Take a listen.
This is a sort of cheap talk to get around the fundamental problem, which is the bipartisan commission chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker said back in 2009 that mail-in voting is fraught with the risk of fraud and coercion.
But since then, there have been
until
a lot
this
of investigations that haven't proved it.
Let me talk.
Yeah, please.
And since that time, there have been, in the newspapers, in networks, academic studies saying it is open to fraud and coercion. The only time the narrative changed is after this administration came in. But elections that have been held with mail have found substantial fraud and coercion.
Friends, there's very little doubt that fraud has occurred in this election. It's just a question of the scale. Was it enough to change the election or not? Remember back in 2016 when the Democrats pretended that a tiny amount of money spent by some Russian troll farmers on Facebook ads, that threw the election to Trump over Hillary? Russia collusion! A lot of us said, look, you're being completely disingenuous. No one really thinks that those troll farmers were enough to change a presidential election with billions of dollars spent with a multi-billion-dollar media apparatus vying for attention in this country. $100,000 on Facebook, that's a joke. That's a drop in the bucket. But they completely ignored all sense of scale and context because they wanted to throw a fit. They wanted to act like the election had been stolen. And that's exactly what they did. Here's something for you. I spoke to a good friend today. I can't tell you who it is yet. It was off the record. But friends involved in the election in Pennsylvania. He said that he knows of at least 80 cases reported so far of dead people voting in that state so far. Those are just the ones they found out about. Now, maybe it's just same name. Maybe there's some problem in the process. But there's a problem in the process. And there's also the very real possibility that, yes, dead people are voting. We know what that actually means. It's fraud. Now, you can tell me that I'm being anti-science. You can say I won't listen to the experts, but I'm pretty sure a dead person can't vote in a presidential election. So can we just establish that first? Maybe you could say I don't believe in miracles or something. If you're going to tell me it doesn't really matter, we don't need to look into this, I'm going to need an explanation for how that could be the case when, as of today, we're talking about Trump and Biden being separated by a few thousand votes, if that, in some of these key states. But what they want you to believe is that the scale of the fraud, it just doesn't matter. Based on what? I don't buy it on their say-so, and neither should you. This is the phase of the process where the option is to take this into court and fight for what is right and true and fair. And at the end of that process, if it turns out that even though there was a little bit of fraud here and there, it wasn't systematic enough that it changed the outcome, and Donald Trump did in fact lose, I'll say, all right, team, we mount up, we fight, we go on, and that's where we are. But we're not there yet. We need to fight now for every inch. We fight this until the end because that's what our election process deserves. This is what the full faith and credit of the American people requires in this instance. For us to believe that any election going forward is going to be something we can put our faith into at all, we need to know what happened this time around. All right, the counting continues in key states tonight, but this election is headed to the courts. We are going to talk to the CEO of American Majority, Ned Ryun, right after the break. Welcome back. The Trump campaign is promising more legal action after filing suit in Michigan, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, arguing that Democrats are possibly rigging the vote count. The president last night reiterated what he had said was going to happen months ago.
Democrat officials never believed they could win this election honestly. I really believe that. That's why they did the mail-in ballots, where there's tremendous corruption and fraud going on.
But while the counting continues, both camps remain confident they will rise to victory.
We think we will win the election very easily. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof, and it's going to end up perhaps at the highest court in the land.
We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working. The count is being completed, and we'll know very soon.
Where are we in this process, and what are our prospects in it? With the latest, let's bring in our friend, CEO of American Majority, Ned Ryun. Ned, give it to me straight, man. How are we doing right now?
Well, I will say this. This is going to be a very interesting time for the Trump campaign. To put it mildly, I mean, this is shameful, though, what's taking place, Buck. I mean, this was completely avoidable. Most civilized countries, a lot of civilized countries, don't do universal mail-in ballots. France outlawed them in 1975 because they're rife with fraud. And yet here we have unelected public officials just decided by, their own decisions to insert universal mail-in ballots and cause the chaos. And I just want to remind people there were 300 lawsuits this year from the left, from Democrats, to get this to take place, to turn this into universal mail-in voting, to take election day, turn it into election weeks, to create this chaos. And so I'm making the argument, embrace the chaos. I think the Trump campaign should do all of the above. They're already litigating. They're already calling for recounts. So we know Georgia's going to be triggered into a recount just by law. They should leave nothing, no stone unturned. I will tell you this, Buck. There was an interesting interview today on another channel by Rod Blagojevich, the former governor of Illinois, in which he said, of course, there's fraud that's taking place. I came out of the Democratic machine in Chicago. It's a time-honored tradition in Democrat politics, whether it's Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Atlanta, for the machine to control the entire process by which votes are counted in these major urban areas. So I think it's incumbent upon the Trump campaign, and it's going to be very hard, Buck. I'm under no illusion that this is going to be easy to track, because I would remind people, as soon as ballots come in and separated from the envelope, they become anonymous. So yeah, sure, they could prove that 30 or 40,000 dead people voted in Wisconsin or Philadelphia, but how are you going to know which votes are actually invalid or not? And so I think it's a tough hill for the Trump campaign to climb, but they have to do it, because I think Trump has to look at the American people and tell them this isn't about me. This is about making sure that we have free and fair elections where all legal votes are counted in a trustworthy and transparent way, so that you can actually trust the system. You can start to trust institutions, because my fear is no matter how this actually turns out in the end, Buck, half the American people are going to go, we think you stole the election. We don't think this is legitimate. Therefore, we don't accept anything that you will attempt to implement over the next 2 to 4 years.
Ned, there's this narrative out there that you get from Democrats right now, although in general, they will make blanket statements, and I could cite people by name, but I don't want to waste your time, who will say there's no such thing as voter fraud. And then people like me and you will do, of course there is. We'll do a Google search and say, well, there's a guy last week who went to prison for it in the district we're talking about, or there's a guy, a month ago. If it happens with some frequency, and that's just what's caught. I always like to tell people it's a little bit like tax fraud. Some people get in trouble for it. A whole lot more people are doing it, as we all know. It's just a question of who's actually going to get in trouble for it in the first place. But we had a guy in Philadelphia. There's a federal indictment where somebody was and he explained, because he ended up taking a guilty plea because they had him nailed. It was in Philadelphia. He was working for political consultants, and he just and had people that he was working with at the polling places who, the moment they thought the coast was clear, they looked at the list of people registered and started filling out ballots on their behalf and just running up the scoreboard as fast as possible. It's actually pretty hard to catch that. So why do we keep getting told there's no fraud when that's actually a lie? That's not true.
It is a lie. And I think the thing, though, that's going to be hard, as we know, is for the Trump campaign to actually prove enough on a scale that's big enough to say, actually, the vote fraud that took place might have been 30, 40, 50,000 votes that exceeds the margin of victory in this state. Therefore, we actually are going to litigate this, and the courts have to look at it at that point. That's the burden of proof, and it's a shame because I really do feel like it's completely flipped the burden of proof onto the Trump campaign and saying, well, you actually have to prove it, and if you can't prove it, well, then it doesn't exist. We know it exists. I mean, there are a lot of anomalies that took place on election night where it just doesn't pass the smell test. I mean, how does Joe Biden, who hung out in his basement half the time, exceed Obama's high mark in votes by over 4 million votes? How does a supposed blue wave turn into something where Republicans are probably going to pick up 10 to 15 seats in the House? Hopefully, and I have to tell people, we got to be careful we keep the Senate, because these two Senate elections in Georgia are causing me some real angst because of what's taking place in Fulton County. So don't sleep on it and say that we somehow kept the majority in the Senate, because if we don't, it's game on for whatever they can pull off if Joe Biden eventually wins it.
Tell folks listening right now, Ned, this is really important, because one thing that made me feel like, look, I want Trump to fight for every inch, and whatever I can do to help the campaign get the word out about the need to see this process through and bring the legal challenges, I'm all on board for that, right? I'm saying hop into the trench and let's see how we do. Just because you hop in the trench doesn't mean you win, as history shows us. But
That's right.
When you look at the Senate, that was a little bit of a, keeping people calm in the background. Okay, it's not going to be that bad. What do you mean we're not necessarily going to keep the Senate? I know about these Georgia races, but I want you to tell people about the runoffs, what's happening.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, with Purdue not making the 50.0 mark in Georgia, it's being forced into a runoff. And obviously, Kelly Loeffler's race is now into a runoff. I think it's January 5th for both of them. And this is where it's going to come down to. If they don't win, if Republicans don't keep both of those seats, I think it becomes a 50-50 tie in the Senate. And if Joe Biden wins, God forbid, Kamala Harris then becomes the deciding vote. And I was the same way, Buck, on election night. I woke up the next day and said to my wife, at least we kept the Senate. We can stop the massive stupidity, whether it's court packing, whether it's adding statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico, removing the legislative filibuster, all of these things that would be devastating and lead to one-party rule. At least we have the Senate and can put a stop to the madness. And then yesterday, watching the votes come in from Georgia, especially in Fulton County, really started to get a very uneasy sensation that almost feels like, and I have to tell you this, Buck, Georgia, Biden really doesn't need Georgia to win. It almost feels like a dry run for the January 5th special elections to see what they can actually get away with, because I'm telling you, this will be an absolute dogfight like we've never seen for these two Senate races, because of the implications of what it would actually look like for the next 4 years. We either can put a stop to the madness with a Senate, or they're going to get everything they want.
What
all
are some
crazy far left ideas?
Without any check on a Biden administration and Democrat majority, then I actually turn into one of these people who is straight up worried about the future of the country, right? With the Senate in Republican hands, I tell everybody, get ready for the fight ahead. We're going to be all right. We're still going to fight, but we're taking heavy incoming if they have the House and the Senate and the presidency, which I can't believe we're even at that point. We have to talk about it, but we do. But Ned, what did you see in Georgia, if anything, that in this process at this stage that's raised some alarm? I know there was the water main break, but what else has gone on there? Which they're saying, this stuff happens, right? Okay, well, but what else happened?
Right. How convenient. This has happened in all the major urban areas that were obviously key battleground states for not only Trump, but key Senate races. Hey, let's just stop counting votes, and then all of a sudden 4 a.m. new votes show up that somehow heavily favor Joe Biden. I mean, there's a process in place, as Blagojevich pointed out. It's just a whole process that something's there. This process is in place, and it's really suspicious when, coming out of Philadelphia, just talk about Philadelphia, when you have, 23,277 votes that all went for the last vote to Joe Biden. Come on, people. If you're going to do that, at least give maybe 10% of the votes to Trump. Don't be so obvious. But that's what worries me about Georgia, that they have put in place a system that unless Republicans, Mitch McConnell had better dig in on Georgia. He better invest a lot of time and money starting this week in going down and saying, we are going to examine this process by which votes are coming in, and we're not going to let it happen for these special elections in January for these two very key Senate races.
Yeah, I think Mitt Romney in 2012, there were, 95 districts in Philadelphia where he got 0 votes. 0% of the vote. We're supposed to believe that.
At what point do the American people say we've had enough, right? Do they say we're not going to put up with this anymore? We have to get back to being able to trust our institutions. And I have to tell you, there's always been question marks, right? There have always been question marks about, hey, that looks really suspicious. We've been able to manage during the national elections with some of these major urban areas and battleground states. But this is like nothing we've ever seen. At what point do the American people say, we've got to get back to trusting this? We want more transparency. Why are you cardboarding over windows? Why are you keeping observers 100 feet away? Why are votes showing up in the middle of the night? There's a lot of cause for suspicion about what's taking place. We deserve answers. And I think that's the thing that Trump has to do. And I want him to look at a camera, Buck. I want him to look straight into the camera and say, I am going to do everything I can to win. But if it's the last thing I do as the president of the United States, I believe I owe it to the American people to get us back to being able to trust the electoral process. I will do everything in my power to be able to do that. And if at the end of the day, every legal vote is counted in a trustworthy and transparent way, and I lose, I am more than happy to leave and go back to making obscene amounts of money. God bless you. Go in peace.
Ned Ryun, everybody. Ned, have a good weekend. Back in the fight next week.
Thanks, Buck.
We'll be back in just a moment. Safe to say that the COVID-19 year has turned 2020 into a unique election. As we mentioned earlier, the pandemic has led some states to radically change their voting processes. Some of these were not approved by the people, the legislature, and in many cases not even upheld by the courts. Despite all this, Democrat battleground states used the looser regulations to their distinct advantage. Let's take a look at some of the details and open up the Buck Brief. So it was a very different process this time around, and we know that most of this was because we were told people were so afraid of COVID. And in fact, under similar thinking to the emergency powers that states like New York, for example, took in the executive branch, Governor Cuomo, it's true in other states as well, decide that they're in effectively a perpetual state of emergency and they can just do what they want to do. One of those emergencies, it seemed, was making sure that people could vote via mail-in ballots, universal mail-in ballots. There were states where they were sending people ballots without requesting them. That's what the universal mail-in ballot difference is with the usual absentee ballot system, where somebody who has to be a registered voter requests in advance, hey, send me my ballot. I'm not going to be able to get there on Election Day. Now, just for the record, in my opinion, unless you have a valid reason, you should probably have to be there and actually vote on Election Day. I don't like early voting. I don't like all these games that are being played. But the changes that were made this year, there's no question they were significant and they were intentional. And the reason Democrats fought so hard for this, one of the reasons that Democrats like Nancy Pelosi were telling stories about Trump trying to defund the post office. You remember that? Remember the post office conspiracies over the summer? Well, that was because they were trying to make sure that there'd be no opposition that could mount in the media and among the public to stop these mail-in ballot practices from expanding all over the place, because they figure that that's going to help them out. Now, some of it is they just think that their voters are more prone to do this. Maybe they're more afraid of COVID overall. In fact, there's polling to show that Democrats somehow are more concerned about getting COVID than Republicans tend to be, and that's true across all age demographics and all backgrounds. But let's take a look at the election changes. We got a map for you here. Blue states, states highlighted in blue, made significant changes to parts of their election process compared to 2016. And now we're going to be told that all this stuff is just, just fine. Well, in Pennsylvania, prepaid return postage provided for mail-in and absentee ballots. You had absentee and mail-in ballot receipt deadline extended to November 6th. That's a big one. So now you're going to give 3 additional days for Election Day? What if a state says, you know what, you guys have your election when you want. We're going to have ours in December. We feel like it's more of a Christmas than a Thanksgiving vibe. Would that be acceptable? No. Why? Because we have rules. Drop boxes for returning completed absentee mail-in ballots were authorized. That's fine, assuming there's no fraud involved with those drop boxes, right? I mean, that's just a convenience thing. But extending the deadline for ballots, that's one that is being challenged. The Supreme Court did look at this, and they said, well, we're going to revert to what Pennsylvania wants. But they better keep those ballots segregated that they don't have a postmark on, and that's what has to do with the 3-day window here. Did it get postmarked and sent in by Election Day or not? Well, if it arrived 2 days later, here we are on Friday, we had election on Tuesday, there's no way of knowing unless you keep those ballots separate. Guess what? Turns out they've already commingled a lot of those ballots, and we're supposed to believe that that's all a big good faith error. Do you buy that? I don't. North Carolina witness signature requirement for completed absentee ballots reduced from 2 to 1. So again, just always lessening the requirements in place that try to make sure that there's voter integrity here. Absentee mail-in ballot receipt deadline extended to 5 p.m. on November 12th, 2020. They extended their deadline for mail-in ballots as well. Michigan, mail-in ballot applications were sent automatically to all voters, probably is the reason Democrats won that state. Wisconsin, mail-in ballot applications sent automatically to all voters, same thing there. Nevada, same thing there. So universal mail-in in the key states in this election that as of right now have gone to Joe Biden. They made enormous changes. And you've got to think this also affects the game plan and the ground game. I mean, these campaigns spend a tremendous amount of money. They go through all these different periods where they're trying to do knocking on doors and all of this. And a lot of that was neutralized by this. And also, given the COVID pandemic, there was an enormous advantage to Democrats who tend to like mail-in voting more for a bunch of reasons I'm sure we could get into, by making this a much more widespread practice. Oh, Minnesota, I don't want to leave this one off there. The absentee mail-in ballot postmark deadline for the general election was extended to November 3rd, and witness requirements were suspended. So they just made it looser, harder to trace, harder to track, harder to stop any fraud. And the election deadline map, when we show you that one, you'll see these highlighted states changed their voting deadlines this year for this election. All these highlighted states had different deadlines in place. So they're moving around the times, they're moving around the procedures, all of these things. And as you can see, the states that really mattered in this election overwhelmingly had enormous changes to their procedures at the last minute. One thing I also want to point out, because we're about to go into a period here where they're going to tell us, in my opinion, now I'm analyzing, I'm making an estimation here or a prognostication. They're going to say even when the vaccine comes out, you still have to mask, you still have to social distance and all this stuff. Meanwhile, here's what the CDC said about the election. Voters have the right to vote regardless of whether they are sick or in quarantine. Voters who are sick or in quarantine should take steps to protect poll workers and other voters. This includes wearing a mask, et cetera, et cetera. Check with local authorities. So it's not safe, or it wasn't supposed to be safe for months to vote, so we had to have mail-in ballots, but we're supposed to listen to the experts, and the CDC are supposed to be the experts, and they say, not only is it okay for you to go vote in person, even if you're sick, coughing all over people or whatever, wear your mask, but go vote. People with COVID should go vote in person. Then why is it the case that we needed all this mail-in balloting? Oh, that's right, so Democrats could win and take the election from Trump. What a surprise. Oh, we have so much more coming up for you here in just a second. Stick around. President Trump is making it clear he's not giving up the fight anytime soon. In a recent statement, Trump wrote, "We believe the American people deserve to have full transparency into all vote counting and election certification. We will pursue this process through every aspect of the law to guarantee that the American people have confidence in our government." He's fighting for integrity, and can you blame him? Listen to what someone inside of a PA polling site said.
My name is Brian McCaffrey. I'm a registered Democrat in the city of Philadelphia. Today, I'm at the Philadelphia Convention Center, and I am overseeing the ballot counters. I will let you know the corruption that is going on here. They will not allow us within 30 to 100 feet to supervise the ballots being counted. This is a coup against the President of the United States of America.
It's a coup, he says. Look, this is where we have to take a step back. I'm all for getting into the fight here, and that means making sure that this process was free and fair. There are observers who are supposed to be able to take their places at these poll counting locations. There are rules that must be respected if we're to believe that this was in fact conducted in accordance with the law. And if that's not the case, there should be redress, and for anybody caught intentionally making sure that's not the case, there should be consequences. But before we start saying this is a coup, before we assert for sure that this is stolen, let's get to proof. There's smoke. I just want to see where the fire is. And to get there, we're going to need to bring these court challenges. We're going to need to make sure that there's a legal process that plays out, because otherwise we know we're not going to get the answers. If we don't fight, friends, if the Trump administration were to just back off this thing entirely and decide, you know what, we've had enough, we'll never get answers. The Democrats, Joe Biden, will just declare victory and they'll move on. And, oh, get ready for them hating Republicans every bit as much, even after Trump is gone. I want you to know that right now. I want you to remember that. One of the pitches that we had of the return to normalcy, if you had a Biden presidency, was that he would unite us and we'd get rid of this fascist Donald Trump. The guy's not a fascist. People say that are insane. But guess what? They said that Mitt Romney kept women in binders and gave old people cancer. They said that Bush was a Hitlerian war criminal, and they wanted Dick Cheney to be arrested by The Hague. These people, the left, they are nuts. That's not going to change whether Trump ends up pulling off this last-minute victory or not. So don't forget that also as we go into all this. And remember, if we get ahead of where the facts are, if we start making declarations, not of our belief about this election, you can say, I believe there's fraud. I do believe there's fraud. And I do believe that it is widespread, and it may be enough. But notice, maybe. I can't prove it yet. Who does that? Who uses allegations for political purposes that they can't back up with the facts? Oh, that's right, the Democrat Party. Remember how Hillary Clinton didn't really lose the election? There was some plot involving Trump and top campaign officials, or officials on his behalf, whatever, to reach out directly to and use the Kremlin's underhanded cyber warfare tactics to steal the election. It wasn't that Hillary couldn't show up, couldn't be bothered to show up in Wisconsin, or that she was a remarkably uncharismatic and unlikable president. No, presidential candidate. It wasn't that. It was that the Russians did it, you see. We were to blame it all on the Russians and, of course, Donald Trump, who was a traitor. So I'm sorry if I won't sit here and be lectured about conspiracies and be lectured about lack of hard evidence from people who not only said this, but took action on the Russia collusion delusion for 4 years. They got a special counsel going to look into this. They had countless investigations, endless news stories and editorials. This was the primary method of political opposition to the president for at least the first 3 years of his term, and it was all based in a lie. And now they turn around and look at us and say, why aren't you acting in good faith? You don't know if there was cheating. There's no cheating. Well, there's always some cheating. There's always someone somewhere who tried to undermine this election. But see, unlike what Democrats did in 2016, unless we can prove it, I'm not going to go around, nor are other well-advised conservatives going to go around saying that this election was stolen. We don't know yet. We're trying to find out. But there's a lot of early indicators that something's up. Why do Democrats suddenly hate transparency? Why is it that they're not willing to make sure that we can all count on the foundations of our democracy, our sacred institutions? Don't they have some need? Don't they have some desire to bring us all together? I thought that's what the Biden presidency in waiting was all about. Oh no, friends. Get ready for the mask to drop there, too. They're telling us today that Biden will govern if he ends up being president, which is still an if, despite everything. And Biden will govern as a centrist, as a moderate. This is a man you can trust. Joe Biden's not some kind of radical. Who really thinks Joe Biden will make it through his first term without deciding that for health reasons, it's time for him to pass the torch to Kamala Harris, the first African-American female president of the United States? Who thinks that he won't want to take that opportunity? I've got to tell you, friends, if we end up losing the Senate and the presidency, then it really is going to be time to buckle down and get ready for things to get ugly. And I don't mean taking to the streets. I don't mean doing the crazy stuff the left does. I mean the policies that we will be subjected to with very few worthwhile political bulwarks against it are going to really hurt. It's going to be bad news. And if we find out at some point in the future that we wouldn't even be in that position if we had just been willing to fight today to get the real answers about what's happened in Pennsylvania, what's happened in Georgia and Nevada and Michigan and Arizona, who will we really have to blame? Those members of the GOP who seem like they want to cut and run at this stage, they were so happy to get Trump's endorsement. They were so happy to ride the Trump train while it was just speeding along without a care in the world. Now all of a sudden there's a fight, and there could be some battles that come for people's reputation. There could be some damage that one sustains for being willing to stand up and say, yeah, I do think. You can say, as people are, that there's some kind of racial component of Trump pointing out what's going on in Philadelphia. That was the claim I was hearing today on MSNBC. That's madness. We're just looking at where the votes are happening, where the vote counting is getting sketchy, and people are asking the necessary questions. But they're going to try to make you cower in fear. They're going to try to say, look, just move on. The pain can stop if you just stop asking questions. I say we refuse. I say we fight until we're satisfied that the fight is over. And that may be days, perhaps even weeks away. Coming up, we'll talk about the buckshot. Stay with me. Joe Scarborough has a change of heart, and Keith Olbermann freaks out again. It's time for a roundup of the left-wing lunacy and terrible takes in a little segment we like to call the buckshot. So is Scarborough a conservative? I got to ask somebody. I'm not really clear on that one. Or a Republican, or is he like down with the Lincoln Project? Those loons. I give them credit. What an amazing grift. $30 million, I think, that they raised, all to throw all their ideals and decades of work in their adult lives under the bus as just worthless. But nonetheless, they did raise a whole bunch of money, so cash is king, I suppose. But Scarborough over at MSNBC decided to say that we should all be totally chill about a Biden administration if that ends up happening, because don't worry, he's going to lead from the center.
Just like Bill Clinton governed, and just like Bill Clinton, Joe Biden knows how to govern. So he will govern from the middle. He will make deals. People on the far left and far right won't like it. But
he's worked with these people before.
Yeah,
so there's a relationship already.
So if he wins, he will be governing from the center.
But if he steps down and Kamala Harris takes over, or if the Democrats have control of the Senate and the House, we really think that's going to stand, huh? I don't think so. Get ready for some executive orders on issues like illegal immigration, making sure that under the expansive view the Democrats take of executive authority, they can basically rewrite immigration law as, prosecutorial discretion. And then as they continue to just make sure that there are more and more caravans lining up at the southern border, remember when that happened? They'll start to say, we need comprehensive immigration reform. That's just the first thing that comes to mind about what we can expect in a Biden administration. But sure, Republicans now, or at least rhinos out there, can be very pleased to know that it's not looking so good for 4 more years of Trump now. Although there are some people out there who are pointing out that Trump could run again. He's completely allowed under, I believe it's the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution, that he could run and get 4 more years. And here's one guy who thinks if he doesn't end up with this 4, he's going to want the next 4. Anderson Cooper, a name that we've all known for many, many, many years. CNN turned him into a household name, and he's thought of, I think, by many as one of the true journalists in our republic. And people that don't have much critical faculty, not much ability to think for themselves. They actually believe that, though. They've been spoon-fed that for so long that they think, yeah, sure, he's a real journo. He's unbiased. He just is fearless and speaks the truth. Here's what he says about the sitting commander-in-chief. Play it.
That is the president of the United States. That is the most powerful person in the world. And we see him like an obese turtle on his back, flailing in the hot sun, realizing his time is over. But he just hasn't accepted it, and he wants to take everybody down with him, including this country.
Notice the unnecessary hysteria and the fat shaming. He goes with he's going to take the whole country down with him. He's not taking the whole country down with him. Stop being such a bunch of babies. All right, people that voted for Trump are looking at this saying, all right, look, maybe, we'll see. We'll fight this one out. We're going to fight with everything we got to get to the truth. But if it turns out it is possible for us to lose elections, we'll see what ends up happening. They're, he's still going to take the country down with him. No, he's not. Shut up. But I also like turtles don't need to be obese to have trouble getting up from being on their back. Anybody that remembers, grade school and cartoons and things knows this. So why the obese turtle? That's right. Our household name journo feels the need to take a fat-shaming shot at the outgoing President of the United States. Because that's what the serious journalists do. Petty grade school insults. But he's just speaking truth to power. Yeah, right. And then there's an actress that I've never heard of before in my life, so I can't pretend that I even know who this, you guys have to tell me who this is. I don't even know. Janelle Monáe. But she shared the sentiment of a whole lot of Hollywood and media folks about this current situation. We can show it on the screen. Hopefully we've eliminated the parts. Blank Donald Trump. I think you can all fill in the blank. And every American citizen, celebrity, white woman, black man, etc., who supported him. Burn. It's funny because I was under the impression that Democrats were trying to convince us all summer that if Joe Biden ended up winning, that the country would go back to normal and we'd all be fine. Meanwhile, today the Biden campaign actually had a spokesperson who put out some statement about how they'll remove a trespasser from the White House if he won't go. Because that's not fanning the flames or anything. That's not being unnecessarily provocative. Oh, no, we all know that it absolutely is. But they should be careful what they wish for on the left. Joe Biden is an incompetent buffoon, and yes, they have elevated him to the presidency, but this wouldn't be the first time that we've had a president in this country who was a total clown and completely inept at the job. Didn't they elect Jimmy Carter in living memory? I mean, come on, folks. We know what this is like. So then you got Keith Olbermann. Now, this is always good. To be fair, he calls me Tex Sex Bump. Keith and I sometimes have a little back and forth on Twitter. And I will say, I actually think that name is kind of funny. So I wear it like a badge of honor. First of all, calling me Tex is amazing, because Texas. But Tex Sex Bump is Keith's name for me. So we can see what Keith has to say about the current situation. Here you go. He's having one of his Keith meltdowns. It's necessary to remove and arrest the President of the United States tonight. Tonight, sir. Again, this is an overt and unmistakable call for widespread violence and requires the arrest of Tucker Carlson. Yeah, go get him, Keith. Good luck with that one. There you go. Go try to arrest Tucker. Good luck with that one. Oh, this is Keith Olbermann with a citizen's arrest. Gosh, the guy really just needs a Xanax and a Zima, and he needs to calm down, Keith. It's all fine. Your team looks like they actually might win this thing. And then you'll have to defend the incompetent buffoon that you've raised to office with no actual ideas of his own and try to convince us all that the left wing doesn't really run your party. It's going to be fun for us, actually. I'm going to be fine with it. Assuming that Trump doesn't win these court battles, which he might, and then you're going to, can you imagine the vat of lib tears that will be gathering if, in fact, at this stage, Joe Biden doesn't end up winning? I'm actually embarrassed for them in advance. Notice our side, we thought we pretty much had it sewn up election night. It turns out, with a little bit of election irregularity in some places, maybe it's not going to go our way. And you know what we're going to do about it? Keep fighting, keep being adults, keep being Americans. It's all going to be fine, folks. That's right. We're happy. We're warriors, but we're happy warriors. Libs are crybabies and authoritarians and increasingly socialists. That's a whole other conversation. Oh, speaking of crybabies, Tapper out there is also saying that Trump is inflaming violence. Let's hear from Fake.
Look, whatever the president says, it's not going to affect the counting of the votes. We have a system where states are in charge of this. States often give that power to counties. And the counting is going on. The question is, will President Trump's continued desire to inflame tensions by making patently false allegations about this election and about the integrity of our very democracy, will that inflame his supporters so much that there will be violence? That is the real risk, and that is what the people around the president have got to be thinking about when they're trying to keep him from going public, because they don't want there to be Americans physically hurt.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to take lectures from CNN after CNN viewers spent much of the summer spitting in cops' faces, calling for defunding the police, lighting buildings on fire, and looting grocery stores. But, you know, there's that. That's it for Hold the Line with Buck Sexton today, friends. Up next, the No Spin News with the one and only Bill O'Reilly. Have a great weekend and shields high.